Guys, I wanted to address two things. One is that the Supreme Court may soon hand crypto a critical victory against the SEC. And two is what we talked about yesterday, that a Bitcoin ETF might have already been agreed to in secret, maybe partially to avoid the SEC completely losing to Grayscale, because the SEC would rather have BlackRock and Fidelity have an ETF rather than deal with Grayscale being the sole ETF out there. And all this comes to a head is why you need to DCA in starting right now, because you might miss the opportunity of a lifetime if you don't. And if you want to be safe, you DCA just into Bitcoin because that has the least amount of risk. In fact, you could buy some of those Grayscale funds if you meet the minimum requirement. So how is the Supreme Court going to hand crypto a victory? We've discussed this a little bit before, but it's the major questions doctrine. What that actually says is that the major questions doctrine is a principle of statutory interpretation in the United States administrative law, which states that courts will presume that Congress does not delegate executive agencies issues of major political or economic significance. So what they want to say is the courts or Congress has not delegated the SEC with such powers in terms of declaring cryptos whether securities or not. And because of the way that the justices have actually ruled recently in curtailing agencies' power, they're very likely to rule the same way with the SEC. Now, if the Supreme Court hard caps the SEC's power, there's very little the SEC can do about it, and they might not have the ability to actually sue crypto companies anymore until Congress does actually make a decision. So at the Supreme Court level, if they actually make this decision, the SEC will become completely powerless to actually sue cryptos. And I do think that they will actually rule this way if it comes to it, because they have been consistently voting in this way. Remember, there's 6 conservative justices versus 3 liberal ones. Generally, like if a case like the SEC comes up to the Supreme Court, they will probably rule 6-3 in Ripple's favor. And this doesn't actually matter which president's in office, because remember, Supreme Court justices serve basically for life. So they don't change every 8 years. And the composition of the court being conservative right now will probably hold for the next decade or two. So I do think the SEC is basically destined to lose, and this is one of the reasons why I believe it's actually destined to lose. Because they have ruled on other cases with other agencies regarding the major questions doctrine, and essentially, if the SEC decides to actually appeal, or if the SEC even wins the case and Ripple decides to appeal, which will take several more years, I do believe ultimately the SEC will get smacked down by the Supreme Court. So when the SEC notices this, they might not actually appeal some of these losses. I think, and this doesn't only apply to the Ripple lawsuit, it applies to the Coinbase one. So I do actually think that the Supreme Court is actually on our side. It might take a while for this to come down, but if it goes to the Supreme Court or if they step in, I do believe that they will hand crypto a resounding victory, and I think Gary Gensler is trying to delay this from happening for as long as possible. The other thing is there's so many ETF applications out there. There is supposed to be a secret meeting next week. Some people said it already happened this week. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think this is not normal for applications. So I do actually think there might have been an agreement in secret, maybe because of BlackRock and Fidelity, after they refiled their applications, that they were going to let some ETFs through. Now, if they let those through, they're probably going to let Grayscales through, but I think the SEC would rather have several ETFs are running, most of them which have some kind of surveillance agreement by these big banks, rather than just Grayscale having the sole ETF that people are actually investing in. So I do think there's already some kind of agreement that then an ETF has already been kind of approved in the background, but they just haven't announced it yet. And I do think Gary Gensler does know that eventually if it goes to Supreme Court, he is probably heading for a defeat because the court's composition isn't going to change anytime soon. But what does this all mean? It means that you need to start DCAing. Don't go all in, but you should start DCAing every month, every week, because if you don't do it this summer, you might miss your best opportunity. Because after this cycle, things might actually become very, very regulated. And while we'll still have bull runs and bear periods, it might not be quite as explosive as it was before. So this could actually be your last big bull run opportunity, at least for American exchanges. So that's the news for today. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe, hit that bell notifications button. Thank you and have a nice day.